The title of my talk tonight is Making Decisions of Integrity. How many of you think making decisions is important? I'll try this side. How many of you think making decisions are important? How many of you have ever had a polygraph? None? I mean, I do this in the States, and they'll have at least a third will raise their hands. Aren't you glad that they don't have polygraphs available down at Tesco or... Aren't you glad your spouse can't get a hold of polygraphs? I was recently in a friend's home, and one of their grandkids was staying with them, and it was time for bed. And this little kid's name is Zach. He's 5 years old. He's my buddy because I brought one of my grandsons with me once, and now he knows I'm a papa, so he's my buddy. And he and I were talking, and I was trying to describe the difference between truth and lying to a 5-year-old. You ever tried that? It's a little bit of an abstract idea for them, but anyway, nonetheless, this little kid, he always over-exaggerates. I mean, he when God made him, he made him complete with this gargantuan imagination, and he likes to entertain everybody. Anyway, it's time for him to go to bed, but he'd seen on TV that Shrek was coming on. So he tells his mom and dad, his papa and Nana, he says to them, I'll go to bed after I see the show. And they said, no, that's not going to work. So the little dude, you can see his mind begin to think, how am I going to work this? And he says, okay, I'll tell you what, after I pick up my Legos, then I'll go to bed. No, that's not going to work. Then he pulls out the ultimate trump card. He says, Papa, Jesus in the Bible told me I could watch Shrek. And I'm over here, I'm the guest, and I break out laughing. I'm about to fall on the floor. Kind of ruins the whole moment, doesn't it? Especially if you're the parent trying to. What the frightening thing is, though, is that studies that have emerged in the past couple of years are telling us that the younger generations are becoming less and less truth tellers. In fact, let me give you some stats. 52. These are all from 2012. 52% of job resumes contain fabrications. Employers, heads up. 74% of high school seniors admit that the last year that they had cheated on an exam. That's up 13% from a decade ago. And 92% of those same high school seniors confessed to lying to their parents. That's up 7% from a decade ago. Study after study is showing that our culture is growing more and more dishonest. And it's not so much that they're these big whopper lies, but they're the little insidious, overt lies, what we like to call the little white lies. I would guess that most of the people in this room are basically honest, law-abiding people. We don't just tell the whopper kind of lies. But if you're like me, temptations face us every day to bend the truth in order to save face, in order to not hurt somebody else's feelings. But the truth is, you make your choices, then your choices make you. You okay? You thinking about that? Every decision that you make on how you're going to handle the truth will determine what kind of person you become. The Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 4, he's talking in the context of relationships in the church, and here he talks to them about truth-telling, and he says, instead, speak the truth in love, which we will in all things grow up into him who is the head, even Christ. Paul's saying here that as individuals, when we commit ourselves to telling the truth to one another, there is a unity that develops in the community that will cause us to grow, that will cause us to be more mature. And there is this sense in which when we keep promises to people, it determines how we grow into being a man or woman of truth. How many of you think keeping promises is important? Okay, I'll try this side again. How many of you guys think keeping your promises, when you make a promise, you think that's important? Okay, you guys over here? You with me? You know, sometimes I wonder how my grandkids are going to grow up, what they're going to be like. Will their word be their bond? Will they exaggerate? What about you? How do you deal with the truth? I'm not going to waste your time today. I literally have sat through 50, 60, 70 messages in my life that where the preachers are telling you, don't lie, don't do this, don't do that, whatever you do. And I find myself, you know, that kind of message has really never helped me a whole lot. We've got to do more than tell people what not to do. How many of you say that's the truth? We really do. You're not going to believe this, but when I was a kid, I was taught about lying. My kids, I didn't go to church when I was little, but my parents would send me to this Baptist church youth camps or children's camps. They call them Bible camps. I call them concentration camps. And they sent us to these camps. And actually, I learned about lying from a little song that they taught me. It's to the tune of Frere Jacques. And this is how it goes. It goes, Revelation, Revelation, 21:8, 21:8. Liars burn in hell, liars burn in hell. Burn, 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 burn. How do y'all like that? Kind of catchy. Maybe you want to teach that to your kids. Not really. Don't do that. Instead, what I want to tell you tonight is your words have the power to create reality and to create life. Write that down. Your words have the power to create reality and to create life. Literally through the words that you speak, through the things that come out of your mouth, you can bring worlds into existence. Do you remember when God created the universe from the book of Genesis? How did he physically do it? It says God spoke and it happened. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and God said, let there was light, there was light. God said, and there was. Do you remember? God spoke and it happened. Then over in John chapter 1, as he's retelling the story of creation, he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word spoke, and things happened. There is a power in the Word during creation. Reality comes from your words. In Genesis, it says that woman and man are created in the image of God. How many of you believe that's true? I need to see your hands, guys. So basically, he's saying this. As God did, so you and I also have the power to do. I believe God has endowed you and I with the power of creation through our words. We can talk and things start to happen. Now, I'm not speaking literally that you can just have this wish and then you speak out whatever that wish is and it's going to happen. That's not possible. If it were, probably the next words out of my mouth would sound something like Ferrari. That's not the case. But human beings, through their language, create reality in their own lives and in the lives of other people. You imagine something, you have a desire that rises up in you, and you speak and you make a promise to another person, and that promise creates a reality, an expectation in the other person. If you still don't understand what I'm talking about, James, the brother of Jesus, wrote this in his writings. He's talking about the word-altering power of the words, the power of the mouth. He says in James chapter 3, we put this bit into the horse's mouth and we turn it wherever he wants. We have this little bitty rudder on the back of a ship and it turns the big old ship wherever we want. In the same way, your tongue is a small part of the body and it makes a great boast, just like the ship and the bit in the mouth of the horse. It determines where that vessel goes. You have the power to speak promises. And these promises then create expectations in the minds of others. I'm going to show you how this works. Then they forge reality into someone's head. So there it is. Promise creates expectation. Expectation creates reality. Okay, you're married. Some of you are married. Are some of you married? Okay, here's how it went. When you got married, at some point you said the words, I do. That created a set of expectations in the other person. You spoke into existence a marriage that was not a reality just moments before. So when you say to your boss, on Monday morning the reports will be on your desk, are you creating in that boss this expectation that they can see those papers on Monday morning? Or when you say to a child, I'll be there at your soccer game, in their mind, are you not creating an expectation as they go running down the field that they can look over to the stands or over to the sidelines and they can see mom and dad or grandpa and nana, whoever, they see them at the sidelines cheering them on? Are you not creating that expectation? James says that very tiny part of your body, that mouth you have, that tongue that you have, it has an incredible ability to create reality. Men and women, I want you to see that your everyday promises are so profound. I mean, you have this big bang energy in the things that you say. The Bible speaks of integrity in the terms of willingness to live in the worlds that you've created by your words. Now, when I back up from the podium, it's not because I don't know what to say next. It's because you really need to take that to heart. That was absolutely huge, very important. Integrity is the willingness for you to live in the worlds, that you've created by your words. Let me put it another way. Integrity is our track record of keeping our promises. The word that is used for keeping promises throughout the Bible is the word faithfulness. How many of you think it's important to be faithful? Faithfulness denotes a reliability, a fidelity, and a dependability. It's marked by a dedication to keep a promise. The Bible's very fond of pointing out that while we human beings are very skilled at creating expectations in the minds of other people, we often fall short at this very point. In fact, the writer of Proverbs says it this way: many a man claims to have unfailing love, but a faithful man who can find? And some of you ladies are like, yeah, amen, brother. Another passage reads like this: help, Lord, for the godly are no more. The faithful have vanished from among men. Okay, you read these passages and they seem a very bleak assessment on humanity. We Homo sapiens are really keen or I ought to say really bad at keeping promises that we once make. And as I look at those passages and consider my own life, I think I fall in that category too. How about you? I mean, I know there are times that I don't hesitate. Somebody says, okay, I'll meet you at lunch. We'll be there at 11:30. And I know good and well I probably won't be there till 11:45 or 12 at the earliest. But, I don't want to cause a ruffle. And worse than that, I can actually remember some promises that I've made to God. And I've said, God, there's this attitude in my heart, and I really want it to end, and I'm willing to let it go, but it's too hard, it's too much a part of me. Or I say, God, I just want to take this step of faith, and God, if you'll do this, then I'll do this. But it's amazing how God comes through, and then when it comes time for you and I, how do we do? Y'all need to smile when I talk this way. This is good, Claire. I watched Claire. I picked up a new dance step today. And it only works for certain people. You got to have something out here to work on. I'm so excited about you having a kid. That'll be fun. I look in a mirror and I wonder, why is a normal, average Christian guy like me, moral Christian guy, have difficulty with that kind of thing? Am I a faithful person? How about you? How about you? Are you a faithful person? Is your yes, yes, and your no, no? Or do you enter into an agreement with the thought that, later if this really gets too tough, no big deal. It's just not that big a deal. I'll bail out on it later. Think about the people that are closest to you. Your spouse, your parents, significant other, kids, friends, employers, even God. What would they say about your faithfulness? Every real human relationship on this planet is built on an exchange of promises. Write that down. Friendships, families, churches, corporations, cultures, societies. The great French philosopher Rousseau, he's the guy that introduced democracy to the modern world. He says this: there is a social contract between human beings. If we cannot make and keep our promises to one another, then society falls apart. So it's critical that we learn how to follow through on our promises with our words. When we speak words that come out of a desire, and we make an expectation in that other person. And that expectation creates, when we follow through, a reality. So how you doing? Do you promise? I have fun with kids. I have 8 of those little things. And most of you know Laura and I are in the process of moving way up in the Pacific Northwest, up by Vancouver, where most of our 7 out of our 8 little kids are. And one of the things I like about little kids is that it's kind of hard to pull the wool on them, really. I mean, when you make a promise as an adult, frequently you will hear this little addendum: do you promise? How many of you have heard that? Okay, you know, because they know just because you're an adult and you make the promise, there's no real guarantee. So they try to tack on this little addendum to the contract, and they'll say, "Do you promise? Cross your." And then some kids will go a little further with that because, you know, they want to instill some consequences if you don't fulfill your word. So they say, "Do you promise? Cross your hope to." Yeah. Kids, you don't really need to go that far. You know, but then there's some that are really, really jaded, and they want the consequence of death as if that's not enough. So they say, "Do you promise, cross your heart, hope to stick a needle in your eye?" Yeah, you know, that's right, little Johnny, he's straddling over your limp, lifeless body. He says, "Now, don't lie to me, Dad." Well, children want to know, do you promise? Do you really mean what you're saying? There's got to be some consequences because you are a world creator with your words. Now, don't forget, faithful people, people of integrity, take serious the expectations that we generate with our promises. So I'm not going to stand here before you and just tell you don't lie. It's not really helpful. Instead, I want to talk to you about some practical ways that you can be a more faithful person with your words, with your life-giving, so that you don't destroy trust. Now, in my opinion, faithfulness is predicated upon 2 things. Number 1, promises that you don't make. How many of you have made some promises and you turn back around and you find years later and you say, "Heck, I wish I had not made that promise"? Yeah. Proverbs 20, verse 5 says this: "It is a trap for a man to dedicate something rashly, only later to consider his vows." How many times we do that? We make a rash promise in the heat of the moment. We don't want to offend somebody. And if I make this generalization, very often this character defect tends to be weighted more towards the sides of the male gender spectrum than the female. Now, I can say that because I'm a guy. Now, guys, we sometimes speak rashly without really thinking things through. And unfortunately, it is because sometimes women ask us these deep, penetrating, complex questions. Isn't that right, guys? Okay, you know, so the answer to which, how we answer that determines our health, our vitality, and our general well-being. And so, guys, I put together a little tutorial for you this evening, and to help you learn how to correctly answer these deep questions women sometimes ask. So guys, I'm going to throw the question, and then I'm going to give you a couple of alternatives, and you tell me whether it's A or B, which is the correct answer to the question. Okay, here's some questions that women frequently ask us. "Honey, what are you thinking about?" Now, for a millennium, the standard answer from us guys is nothing. And you know, I don't know about you, but I've recognized in recent years that answer hasn't been working so well. So okay, guys, okay, here it is. Is the correct answer A, I'm sorry, I've been pensive, dear. I've been reflecting on what a warm, wonderful, thoughtful, caring, intelligent woman you are? Or is the answer B, honey, I've been thinking about Manchester United and whether or not they're... Okay, guys, which one is it? It's A, okay. Some of you guys. Okay, here's second question. Here we go. Honey, do you love me? Okay, guys, is the correct answer A, yes, absolutely? Or is it B, would it make you feel better if I said yes? Oh, some of you are living so dangerously. All right. Here's the third question. And now I've really not found a good answer for this third one. I mean, every answer I could think of is fraught with danger. Okay, here's the question. Honey, do you think that girl at the other table is prettier than me? Okay, guys, what's the right answer? A, of course not. Or B, could you repeat the question? I was distracted by the girl at the other table. All right. Guys, whenever a woman throws you into one of those difficult questions, you got to think it through. Don't answer it rashly. We have to think through the promises that we make. There's a sense in which we make too many promises, or at least we make the wrong ones. So let's stop for a moment. And I want you to consider some things to help you in making Here's 3 questions to ask yourself before you make a promise. These are good, serious questions. Number 1, am I being sincere? Am I just saying this to make somebody happy, get them off my back, avoid a conflict, avoid a fight, or am I really being sincere? Write that down. Am I being sincere? How many of you recognize some of these insincere promises? The check is in the mail. We'll do lunch soon. Oh, I like this one. The doctor will be with you shortly. Yeah, right. Oh, one of my favorites. Now, the pastor says, for my final point. Is your promise sincere? Number 2, what am I willing to sacrifice in order to honor this promise? This is not the exact same as the sincerity issue, because I think really most of us, when we originally make the promise, we intend on following through. We have a commitment to it. But we realize maybe later how much it's going to cost us. We discover it's going to be more difficult than we originally thought. Less fun, more painful, less exciting. Have you ever dropped out of a relationship because it didn't turn out to be what you originally thought it was going to be? All right, number 3. Third question. What damage might result from me breaking my promise? One of the reasons it is so easy for me to break promises is we don't consider how it might hurt other people. So before we say yes or agree to anything, take a second to ask yourself in your heart, if I don't come through on this thing, who's going to have to cover for me? Who's going to be damaged by it? What will happen to my credibility? How's my family going to have to respond? You know, the reality is a lot of us sitting in this room right now, today, carry scars from when we were children. And our parents and other adults made promises to us that they never kept. I want to give parents and kids the benefit of the doubt, because I think a lot of parents would have never made the promises if they knew how much it was going to hurt us, if they had a grasp of how painful it was going to be, if they did not fulfill that promise. So you need to ask yourself these 3 questions. It might save you from breaking some important promises in your lifetime. But being faithful sometimes comes down to not making a promise at all. You know, it really takes some guts to stand eye to eye with somebody and to say to them, you know, I'm sorry, I can't do that right now. I'm sorry, can't do it. No. How many of you know that word? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, number 2, we do need to make some promises in life because, as we said, promises are the foundation of relationships. But promises need to be well thought out because it's better to keep your mouth shut than to utter something that you're not going to follow through. Ecclesiastes says in the Old Testament about this and about making vows. The guy who writes Ecclesiastes, he calls himself the teacher. And he says of himself, he says that the more that the other person in the universe, he said, God really is bothered by our breaking up of promises. Ecclesiastes 5 verse 2, do not be quick with your mouth. Do not be hasty in your heart to utter anything before God. God's in heaven, you're on the earth. Whenever you make a vow to God, do not delay fulfilling it. It's better not to vow than to vow and not keep it. Notice God really takes seriously this thing of promises or the thing of vows. Both the things that we make to Him and the vows that we make to other people. So let me ask you a question. Right now, are there any unfulfilled vows that you have made to God that are still hanging around out there? Are there any moments that you spoke a reality into existence and you meant it with all of your heart at that moment, at that time, but you've not followed through? You were a teenager, you were at youth camp. You said, God, you know, I really want to serve you all of my life. You said, God, if you'll just get me through this particular situation, then I'll do X, Y, or Z for you. This evening, do you remember a vow that you previously made? Do you have something you need to recommit yourself to re-pursuing? So I said faithfulness is predicated on, number 1, promises you don't make. Number 2, promises that you keep. Did you know there's an entire book in the Bible that's dedicated to broken promises? And it's the book of Malachi. Interesting to me, last book in the Old Testament. And it comes at a time when God realizes the Israelites are not going to follow through with what they promised to Him that they were going to do. And it's also interesting to me, it's the last book in the Bible, and it's another 400 years before God ever speaks again. I wonder why. Malachi speaks, chapter 2, verse 10, just one example. Have we not all one Father? Did not one God create us? Why do we profane the covenant of our fathers by breaking faith with one another? Did you hear that phrase? Breaking faith? Malachi is really indicting. He says, hey, you know, don't you understand when you break faith in commitments you make with other people, it does violence to God. It hurts God's heart. Why do we do that to other human beings? Why do we promise, then break faith with people? We could sit on that question alone and spend the rest of the evening, couldn't we? I was home not too long ago, and I was reading in the advertisements. There was an article about is a car advert, and at the top it says in bold print, "Your trade-in is worth $4,000." Has a little asterisk beside it. Watch out for those asterisks. Then down at the bottom in about 8-point font, really small print, it says, if your trade-in is worth $4,000. You got to watch out for those asterisks. I laugh on the inside, but I think about all through the years, how many people have made promises to me. Bob, we'll be there for you. You can count on us. Asterisk. Unless such and such happens, in which case I'm most likely to drop you in hot grease. Are y'all smiling? The asterisk is the way out when the times get tough, when it doesn't work out exactly the way we thought. If something better comes along, asterisk. The best story I've ever heard about faithfulness. It's an old story from preacher folklore. It's a story of Robertson and Muriel McKelkin. I don't think I've ever used it here. I want to read a little bit of it to you. Robertson writes a book about his marriage of more than 40 years to this woman named Muriel. Listen to what he writes. He says, "It's been a decade since the day in Florida when Muriel, my wife, repeated to the couple vacationing with us the story she just told 5 minutes earlier. Funny, I thought. I haven't heard her do that before. But then what began as an occasion turned into continuance." Then he goes on to write about her diagnosis with Alzheimer's. How many of you know somebody who has Alzheimer's? Nasty, ugly. My mother-in-law has that. Very difficult disease. And he writes about her slow descent and how he reacted to it. Listen to what he says. He says, "She is such a delight to me. I don't have to care for her. I get to. She picks flowers outside, anybody's flowers, and fills the house with them. Lately, she's begun to pick them on the inside, too. Somebody had given us some beautiful Easter lilies, 2 stems, 5 lilies each. And one day I came into the kitchen, and there on the windowsill was the vase, but one of the stems of the lilies had been removed. Now," he says, "I've learned to go with the flow, not correct her irrational behavior. I mean, after all, she doesn't mean any harm. Secondly, she would not understand if I said her. She wouldn't remember anything if I rebuked her. But he said, nevertheless, that day I did something irrational. I told her how disappointed I was, how the lilies would soon die and the buds would never bloom again. Please don't break off another stem, I told her." The next day, our youngest son, soon to leave for India on a mission trip, he came by at the house to visit. I told Ken about my rebuke of his mother and how I'd felt. We sat on the porch swing, savoring the moments together. His mother came out onto the porch with a gift of love for me. She carefully laid another stem of lilies on the table with a gentle smile and turned back to the house, and I simply said, "Thank you, dear." Ken said, "You're doing better, Dad." Muriel cannot speak now. Sentences are gone. Only phrases, single words, and they often make little sense. For example, she'll say no when she means yes. But there is one sentence that she still says and says it often. "I love you." She not only says it, she acts it. The board of the board of directors at the college where I serve as president, arranged for a companion to come and stay at our home so I could go to the office daily. After 2 years, it's become increasingly difficult to leave Muriel at home. As soon as I would leave, she'll run after me. With me, she's content. Without me, she's distressed. The walk to the school is about a mile round trip. She would make that trip many times, 10 times a day. Sometimes at night, he says, I helped her undress and I found her bloody feet. He says, I wish I loved God that way, desperate to be near him at all times. She teaches me day by day. My friends were wondering how I'm coping as they reflect on how the alleged indispensable characteristics of a good marriage, how those characteristics have slipped away one by one. You remember those: communication, understanding, affirmation, common interest, sexual fulfillment, the list goes on. I reflect yearly on the irrelevance of every one of those criteria for me, he says. As she needed me more and more, I wrestled with the question, who is going to get my full time? The college or Muriel? Our doctor told me not to make any decision based on Muriel's condition. He said, make your plans apart from the question of how is Muriel doing. When the time came, the decision was firm. And it took no great calculation on my part. After all, had I not promised 42 years before, in sickness and in health, till death do us part? He says, I've been startled by the response to this announcement of my resignation. Husbands and wives have begun to renew their marriage vows. Pastors are telling my story to their congregations. It's a mystery to me until a distinguished oncologist who lives constantly with dying people, he said this to me. He said, women stand by their man, but few men stand by their woman. That's more than keeping promises and being fair. He says, as I watched her brave descent into oblivion, Muriel is the joy of my life, the joy of my existence. Daily I discern new manifestations of what kind of person she is. The wife I've always loved. I see manifestations of God's love, the God I long to love more fully. It's a great little book. You might want to pick it up. If you're here today and you're wearing one of these little bands on your finger, it symbolizes a day in our past when we spoke into existence a reality to another person. Now, if you got one on your hands, look at it. Take a look. Remember today we're talking about how God had the power to form a universe with a single word. And on that day long ago, you created a marriage. Do you remember the promises? In sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, for richer and for poorer, till death do us part. I have a question. How's that promise going for you? There's no asterisk in that promise, no proviso in the event that the other person becomes less attractive. In the event that on the other person certain body parts begin to sag. No, you just said, I do. And with this ring, I seal this promise. Come what may. Come what may. You know, I realize this is our 37th year. Not that you and I are married, but I mean, we share the same, 37 years of being married. And you don't really spend a lot of time thinking about that. Just becomes something that we live with on a daily basis. Maybe the best thing we could do today after this service, for those of you that are married, is to take some time and ask your spouse, how's the promise going? How am I doing? Maybe you need to ask yourself, am I as committed to that promise today as I was the day that I made it? There's a percentage of people here today that aren't married. You're single. And for those of you that are single, Muriel's story captures the essence of what our promises need to be. True promises, they're made without asterisks. They're made come what may, come what may. Let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. Promises made and promises kept determine who you will become over a lifetime. I want you to see you have this incredible godly gift inside of you. You have this power. When God puts a desire inside of you and that desire rises up, you have the power to speak something that's going to create an expectation. And if you act on that expectation, it is going to bring into reality something that has not existed before. But when you create a world by your promise, you are bound to it. I'll qualify that in a minute. There are always exceptions. Just as God created the world, He's bound to it. Even though I've been rebellious, I've been disappointing to Him, I've been heartbreaking to Him at times, He is still bound to it. How are you doing with your promises? One of the greatest things about a promise is that in many cases, there is no statute of limitations, no time limit on them. You can go back, you can apologize, you can make a promise good. No statute of limitations. But I do need to speak a word to some of you about exceptions to this promise of integrity. Some of you made promises and vows, and those vows have been broken. This is not a message of guilt or shame of legalism for you to get under because a promise has been broken. To you, I want to speak forgiveness and grace and mercy. But if you find yourself still in the quandaries, I want to be sure that you give it everything that you've got in your heart to give. Did you hear that? Everything that you have in your heart to give. to follow through with that. Because at one point in your life, God stirred something in you to make that promise. Yes, I understand there are exceptions. Yes, I understand things change. I do. So don't get legalistic with me. And don't get under shame and guilt and condemnation. Are y'all okay? Did I say that okay? Okay. Decisions of integrity. He says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Better not to make a vow than to make a vow and not keep it. Don't do it rashly just to get somebody off your back. Understand that when you make a promise, you create an expectation. And that expectation creates a reality. But you're bound to that reality. It's not, okay, I'm going to hang to it for now, but then I've got a little asterisk by it, and if it gets to be too much, I'm just going to bail on it. Come on, guys. We got to be different than that. Did you know that the disparages of relationships inside the church and outside the church are the same? That doesn't speak too well for us, does it? Shake your heads this way. No, it doesn't. Okay. Y'all okay? I hope this has made some sense to you. I hope it's challenged your heart. Let's stand for a moment. Let me pray for you. You've got this incredible force inside of you. God's deposited in you. It is a God-given gift. It is an ability to create with your words. You have the power to create with your words, to take an area where there is no reality and create a reality. You can bring something into existence by your commitment, by your promise. So, Father, we acknowledge right now that you are the ultimate promise maker. You're the ultimate promise keeper. Lord, while life sometimes disappoints us, sometimes we feel disappointed, you've never broken a promise towards us. And Father, even as some of us have felt conviction here today, conviction about promises that are being challenged. God, I pray, give us the courage to have the conversations we need to have, to rededicate ourselves to fulfilling and keeping those promises. Lord, help us be a faithful church. Father, I prophetically declare over Rock Church that this is a group of men and women who are integrous, faithful men and women of the Word. Their yes is yes, and their no is no. Help us learn to speak the truth to one another, to create an environment where we can grow up and where we can mature. I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen? Are y'all okay? Does that make some sense to you? All right. Come on, Anthony.